had to convince the world that there was a better way. We knew that people are mobile. They want to move around while they communicate. And so, to convince the world, we created this phone. I hope I didn't hear any laughing among that cheering. Yes, this phone is a little large, and it weighed 2.5 pounds. The battery life was 20 minutes. That's not a problem. You couldn't hold it up for 20 minutes. So you would think that having created this beautiful instrument, that the world would open their arms. Well, if you're a maverick, you know that that's not the case. And we were told by the market researchers that there is perhaps a market for 2 million phones in the United States. And so it took us some 20 years before we got into the millions, and 30 years before we got into the billions. But today, as Sean pointed out to us, there are over 5 billion cell phones in the world. So we have one other thing that you, the art intelligentsia, and we engineers have in common, and that is passion. How can you stand by for 20, 30, going on 40 years, holding on to an idea, knowing that you're right, knowing that somehow the world someday is going to adopt your ideas? Thank you very much.
How many of you guys remember those phones? Remember that? It's crazy. Well, I'm so excited to bring on the stage Satjiv Chahil. He is one of a legend in the Silicon Valley, and come on up. Welcome him on the stage. Yes. In case you aren't familiar with this amazing man, I have only spoke to you about 2 to 3 times before this. He has made such a positive impact on me. But I also want to talk to you about his amazing career. He is Apple's former CMO, who has had a significant influence in shaping marketing in Silicon Valley, in a career spanning over 30 years with leading innovators of their time, such as IBM, Xerox, Apple, Palm, and HP. Satjiv has been widely acknowledged as a marketing and pioneer and a catalyst for driving key global technology and entertainment. So Satjiv, thank you so much for joining us today. This is amazing. So today we're going to be talking about the past, present, and future of art and design. Satjiv, can you tell us, you've been a part of so many innovations and designs. How did you get started in that? And we can kick it off.
Sure, thank you. First, I'd like to thank you.
Yeah, just a little closer.
Yeah, is it okay? Yeah, I'd like to thank the organizers of Into What, Linda, Show, the whole team. I think it was a brilliant idea to create this forum, and I've been watching all the presentations, if not physically present, over the webcast. And these forums are what takes us to new levels of innovation. And I must confess that I'm neither an artist or a technologist, and I'm just amazed and feel very fortunate to have been at the center of all of these activities. And it was actually at Apple where I ran into engineers who were imagining things beyond the world of computing. And my career had started at IBM. At IBM, it was a world of data processing, information management, and controls. So the whole thought of empowering people and creativity did not really fit with the technology sector. And then I ended up at a place called Xerox here in Palo Alto, where they had the most amazing engineers imagining the uses of technology for our daily lives, but nobody in business could ever imagine making business cases out of these. And the market was considered insignificant and only for business. And at Apple, I got exposed to not just the technologists within Apple, but creative people from other fields, including people using software to create new art expressions. And if I can just share with you the next slide, this sort of preceded, I back, the next, thank you. So I am going forward and then backwards. I ran into a young artist who was asked, educating me about art, and I was going through her scrapbook, and I saw this image here, and I thought it was so relevant for this forum that I took a picture of her art book, and that's Eva who created this art. So the earth without art is air, and I feel it's this technology without art is also exactly the same. And next is my own perspective, and others I've worked with, is that technology is a tool, and it is a tool not just for the creation of art, is what most examples are about, but it's also the tool for the marketing of art, the distribution of art, the access, the enjoyment of it, the preservation of it, and the reimagination of it. So fortunately, my career has allowed me to help sort of raise the tide for all boats to rise, as they say, in every aspect of the business of art as well. Next, please. And this image I want to share with you, again, preceding the world of Adobe, who's done so much for art and the art community, is Kai Kraus, a software developer. And you see this picture of Hans Zimmer. He was the music composer, over 150 movies to his credit, including The Lion King. But that whole image is made out of musical notes. So Kai created this. So as people from the outside start creating new forms of art, it inspires more and more us pushing the barriers or the limits of technology further. The next experience I had, I was in Japan, and for today Apple is pervasive everywhere. At the time we were focused on education and next on design. So we were working with designers in Japan to get them to adopt our technology. At the same time, I started studying Japanese and Japanese calligraphy and brushwork. And as I was doing that, I almost felt that the technology may end up destroying these art forms rather than enhancing. So I had a whole sleepless night, and then next day I called up one of the designers, and the designers, I said, will I be destroying an art form by asking you to use computers? And he, at the time, drew one seagull on his Mac, another seagull with one stroke. There were so many variants of the seagull, and then he changed all the colors. So he said, with a brush, I could never keep up with the imagination. So you've created a new tool for me that helps my creative expression.
Technology has really helped artists not only expand the way that they think of art, but also sharing art as well.
Right.
Very, very interesting. And can you talk to me about music, too? So you kind of expanded into the music world as well.
Yes. I actually, the next step in this,
sure.
before music, was we worked with photographers, and we came across a brilliant photographer, Rick Smolin, who was with Time Magazine, the National Geographic, and he did a day in the life series, A Day in the Life of California. And he came to us with a beautiful story, which we'll have him share after my session. And it's a story from Alice to Ocean. But what Rick had these amazing photographs, which were actually many for a book, but also stories behind them. And at Apple, we had new technologies called QuickTime compression technology and a format called CD-ROM. So we decided to create a book and a CD-ROM together that would tell the story in a much richer and interactive format. Can I show you? On the left is a book. So this was the first ever book that came with the CD-ROM. So at the back of it is a CD-ROM pasted in here. And this created then the imagination for everybody else to find a new format for storytelling. So once we had done this book and the CD-ROM, it got the attention of Peter Gabriel. So to your question of where music interacted, and we had a call into Apple from Peter Gabriel, who wanted to understand deeply this technology and create his own next form of expression in a CD-ROM. So we worked with him to create the world's first music CD-ROM that was globally distributed. And here's an image of this. And here's the original copy of the CD-ROM.
Now, what year was this?
This was in the 1992, 93 time frames. So it's hard to imagine. It's 25 years. But, it is art within art. And that's when also I came to the realization, I only thought of musicians as musicians, not as artists, and how multidimensional they were, and what Kari, it was how they affected us, is that we created the moving image without thinking of the importance of sound. He would not approve it until the sound was perfect. So we had a challenge for our engineers. Luckily, we had engineers who were also musicians. So they would go deep into getting it right, and he wanted the world to hear the music the way he created it.
As if it was live.
As if it was live. So that work from there is led to today us listening to music mostly through digital.
Exactly. And you actually went in to do the first webcast, and that was around music. Can you tell us about that and that experience?
Yeah, so when we created the CD-ROM, there were no distribution channels.
Wow.
So we had to use computer software distribution channels to move this, and then the Tower Records, etc., took it on. And the next wave was how do we spread it faster? So similarly, I had engineers come to my office, show me ways of compression, and we'd keep looking at these technologies and couldn't imagine the use case for them. And at the same time, the Bill Graham organizations approached me in Apple to sponsor the New Year's Eve party with Carlos Santana. And at the same time, I was having these conversations with the engineers, and I say, I finally get it. This is like broadcasting, but we do it over the World Wide Web. So let's call it webcasting. And then everybody's, the light bulb went on.
That's amazing.
And so then we webcast. It was Willie Brown was the mayor-elect, and with Carlos Santana. And it was staggering. We didn't even know it'll work, but it worked. And we had fans from Australia, Europe, all interacting with Carlos, and we knew we were onto something. And next thing, we were asked to webcast the Grammys. And the Grammys have to be flawless. Talk about perfectionists. But the Apple team, Ian Rett was one of the engineers, I remember, worked it to perfection. So when we were webcasting, there were all the usual popular MTV, all the studios, and the artists would go to interviews, CNN, all the major media. Then they'd come to this little booth called Apple Webcasting, and they wouldn't want to leave. So the entire publicists were going crazy because the artists were loving the interaction. I remember watching Seal interact with his fans, and after that, it just spread like wildfire.
At that time, could you see how many people were viewing in real time?
Yes, it is interesting. I'm glad you brought it up. And my first interaction with art, the computers were considered saturated at 15% of the population. So nobody could see the value of the PCs beyond 15%. And by integrating these art forms, it shot up to like 30%. And at Apple, we had a CTO at the time, Jean-Louis Gasset, who said every home will have 3 PCs, and everybody thought he was a nut. Yeah? And then when we get modems, the internet, the web, new art forms, new creativity, it just keeps rising. And then as it goes mobile, so today we have 3 computers at home
So
and
true.
mobile devices.
And sometimes three times phones. And
Right.
how did fashion, tech back then was not so, it was kind of bulky, it wasn't so,
Right.
pretty. How did fashion inspire and affect how the design looked?
See, initially, it was, we just felt very sort of appreciated or whatever that people could enjoy entertainment, but it was tethered to a PC. And it was still considered mostly male product. And all our engineers, were mostly male, the designers were male. And it was only when the mobile devices came that all of a sudden, I was fortunate to be the CMO of Palm when we were taking it public and launching it. We had this lovely design where you see Claudia Schiffer holding the Palm 5, is that most of the mail coming to me was coming from women. And that's when it kind of hit us. Women multitask way more than men. And being organized and getting everything together was a tremendous value to women. And we get a call from Claudia Schiffer saying, you got to make it more fashionable. Yeah? So she introduced her own color and things. And I was horrified that she'd probably ask for huge sponsorship budget and all. So I said, we're not Revlon or neither are we Nike. But she said, no, I want to do this jointly with you. And so she helped create a product, and the fashion side also propelled it into every media. So nobody wanted, other than Tech Press, to talk to us. All of a sudden, just her wanting to do a product put us on every television show everywhere in the world. And actually, it's the women that drove this market more than men. And what was a geek product ended up taking it mainstream into
Can you talk
people's
about the
lives.
materials even that she inspired for you to use and all the metal that was not needed?
Yes. So she sort of got us attention in the fashion world. All of a sudden, I was invited to speak at the New York, what was it, New York Times Fashion Summit and the Condé Nast Summits in Europe. And then in a future project, I was at HP, we decided, why don't we work with a fashion designer to actually create a product? And that's when we came in contact with Vivian Tam, a Hong Kong and New York designer, and we asked her to help design a product. And she said, I want to make it the size of a clutch. And every man thinks of a clutch as an automobile clutch. And we didn't realize it's a form.
It's a purse.
It's a purse.
Yeah.
And she put a purse in front of us. And so that set the size of it. And then she had feelings on the feel, the color, the lacquer, the tactile feel of the keyboard. None of us could ever figure that out or even imagine its possibility. And I show here the picture of an HP designer, Stacy Wolf, who rose to the occasion to work with Vivian. And I'll show this after. Can I share just a half a second of this clip?
Designer Vivian Tam is extending her style beyond dresses and blouses. Last night, models strutted down the runway with Tam's latest fashion creation, a line of notebook computers she designed for Hewlett-Packard. Vivian Tam joins me now in studio along with Satjiv Chahil, Senior Vice President for Hewlett-Packard's Personal Systems Group.
She
nice
designed my tie as well.
It's a clutch.
Yes.
It's a fashion.
It's a fashion. What do you think this is? Kind of looks like a purse, right? You'll never believe it. It's a laptop. It's designed by Hewlett-Packard. Take a look here. This laptop, the first in a designer series of laptops coming out from HP. The first model in your runway show this season walked down the runway with
so
this computer.
So it was launched on the runway. We didn't launch it at the Consumer Electronics Show, neither in San Francisco, but in Fashion Week in New York. And it got all the airwaves around the world.
And here it is.
And this was the follow-on product. Can you show the next slide? Sure. So it was so hugely successful. We sold out in 3 months.
Wow.
And then there was a demand for the second one. And you see the image here. I have the product here. And if I can, Jackie, people can. If you just see the finish of it. She wanted the finish as a snuff bottle. So this, we used new materials, either to your question about materials, other than the usual metal. And by changing to this material called IMR, which Stacy Wolf had found, we have 8 colors fused in there, but we saved enough metal in a year to build the Eiffel Tower.
Wow.
So you could bring in beauty, you could have an environmental effect, and it provided half the profits of that category for HP. So everybody won in this. And I just shared, so I was on a television show with a very famous broadcaster, Vivian and myself, and she asked me, isn't it a little pricey? And I noticed her Louboutin shoes, and I said, looking at your shoes, not really. And she went to share, and and so you can see how art, fashion, design help move a technology product. So it is good business as well.
Very true. And I'm going to go into, it's a really hot topic right now is privacy and hacking and technology. How does art and design come into play with that?
Actually, today, thank you for bringing it up. Today, we're all, while we've been happily giving away access to all our private images and things, now we are horrified about the security of our data. In fact, security is more important in our life now than the physical security of our homes. So check out this product. It looks like the strangest thing on earth. It is a router, a secure router by a company called Symantec. It's called the Norton Core. And it can inform you, anybody trying to hack into your network. So it's a very, very useful product. And but the moment we have a router or something like this, we try to figure out where to hide it. And the moment we hide it, it's not also fully doing its job. So they worked with the design group called Herbst Design. And let me share with you, this is what they created, a geodesic.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Yes. If you go to the next.
Yes, the next slide,
please.
Sorry, this isn't working.
Jackie, if we lost you. So I'll just come up. But, this is an art piece, and it can sit in the center of your home
Beautiful.
anywhere.
Modern,
and this
really
is on the
interesting.
cover of Wired magazine. So I'd suggest, so you see the complexity and the art, and now providing functionality that's essential to all our lives. So compliments to the designers and to the technologists who reach out to the artist to create art forms like this. And if I can share one more image of another art design company, which you wouldn't imagine as a technology company, Swarovski, who create these beautiful crystals. So they've created these wearable products. But if you noticed the watch, it's a crystal case. The crystal is actually a solar crystal. So the crystal cuts actually help it absorb more solar energy than a flat solar panel. So you see art, design, fashion contributing to making technology not only an essential part of our lives, but adding a new emotion, joy into our lives.
And where do you think, you have such a pulse on technology, design, and art. What do you think is next? I mean, wearable technology is becoming fashionable. Art is becoming more accessible. Music you can now stream.
Yes.
Virtual reality, augmented reality.
Yeah.
What do you suspect in the future? What's the new trends coming down?
See, now it's so integrated, as in this forum you see. So the mission we set out 25 years ago is not only alive and well, it's being broadly reimagined. And yesterday, there was a speaker here, Ajay Kapoor, who showed, the enormous integration of both art storytelling. And I have one of the world's finest storytellers that I referred to earlier, Rick Smolan, who will share with you what he took from those photo images to create a CD-ROM and where he's taking his art form to the next. So, Rick, could you please
let's welcome Rick to the stage.
Thank you for coming, Rick.
Thank you for having me.
I'll have you
Come over
sit
here.
on the other side.
So let me just share a little brief synopsis on Rick. He has an incredible career. Rick is a photographer and who has thankfully switched up his flights today. He came in a day early just to join us in this conference. So thank you, Rick, for being here. Rick and Satjiv worked together, like mentioned, for the first digital book called Alice to Ocean. Can you tell us about that story and kind of how you got a part of it? Because she went on a journey.
Sure. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump a few slides ahead here for a second. If this is not working. Maybe, Jackie, if I can, did you put the thumb drive in? Okay. Maybe I'll just have you advance it for me. The wonders of technology. Time Magazine, let's go a few ahead until we get to the Time Magazine cover. These are all projects that we've done. Keep going. One more after that, I think. There we go. So Time Magazine sent me to the outback of Australia to do a cover story on Aborigines. And if you go to the next slide, I walked out of my hotel room and saw this amazing-looking woman washing the windows of my hotel. And I found out that she was going to walk 2,000 miles alone with 4 camels and a dog from the center of Australia through the outback all the way out to the Indian Ocean. If you go to the next slide. And she wrote to National Geographic and asked if they would fund her trip, and they ended up assigning me to be the photographer. She wanted to be out there by herself. She didn't actually understand when she wrote to them for funding that she thought she was going to be writing the story, but they decided that she was the story. So she wasn't particularly happy about me showing up at the beginning, and my job was to find her 5 times during the 9-month trip. I was never even a Boy Scout. I was a New York City kid. I was completely a fish out of water, literally. And I fell madly in love with her, and that was the last thing she wanted. She wanted to be left alone. But every time I left her, I was sure she was going to die out there. There was no GPS back then. There were no satellites. This is, you're off the grid. If you go to the next slide. She would ride these camels about 20 miles a day. If you go to the next slide. I'm going to go quickly through these. You see her in the very bottom of it. This is in the middle of the outback, Ayers Rock. I mean, any of you been to Australia? Or anybody from Australia? So in the middle of Australia, a couple of hands back there, this is the largest rock in the world. It used to be the bottom of a seabed. It's 5 miles around in circumference, and you can climb to the top of it. And when it rains, shrimp hatch in the middle of the desert. It's the strangest. I mean, going to Australia is like going to Mars. You feel like you've gone to another planet. I was just mesmerized. I felt like I'd been wearing sunglasses all my life. The light was so intense, and everything about it was so strange and fascinating. Next slide. Robin had this little wonderful dog named Diggity that she had rescued. She'd gotten a job after college working in a hospital, just being a janitor. And one night, the second night she was working in the hospital, she heard these terrible cries coming from the basement. And she went downstairs and found that they were taking stray animals and using them for experiments. And so she came back that night when everybody had left with the keys, opened up all the cages, all the doors, let all the animals out of the cages. And the little puppy had been brought in that morning. And this was Diggity. And instead of running away, Diggity just sat there at her feet. So Diggity saved her life many times during the trip. When she got lost, Diggity always take her back to where she'd left the camels. And the love affair between Diggity and Robin was quite extraordinary. Next slide. This is Aboriginal kids waiting on a runway for a plane to land. Next slide. Next slide. So when the story came out, it was featured in more than 100 magazines. I mean, this is a person who wanted to be away from everybody else. She did not do this to be famous. She was actually quite reticent about any kind of visibility or publicity. She hated my pictures at the beginning. She felt like I glamorized her. She said, "You make me look like a goddamn model." But she loves the pictures now. She went on, if you go to the next slide, she went on to write a book called Tracks, which is now sold more than 1 million copies in 18 languages. And Hollywood tried for years to figure out how to make it into a movie. At first, it was going to be Diane Keaton. Then it was Julia Roberts. Then it was Helen Hunt. Then it was Nicole Kidman. So every 2 or 3 years, I'd get a call from somebody in Hollywood saying, "We're going to do the movie, and we want you to be a consultant." And my friend who's a lawyer would always say, if you look in the fine print, it says, "You hereby assign all rights in perpetuity throughout the universe for us to portray you in the movie." So if you go to the next one, there's also the most stolen book of the year. So this is the book that Satjiv and I worked on together. I was thrilled for many reasons, not the least of which Robin's story is so inspiring. Everyone that's read her book Tracks, it gives you this great sense of empowerment, but there's also a mystery, which is you don't know why she's doing the trip. And everybody, it's like a Rorschach test. Everybody that reads the book sort of projects their own fantasies of letting go, saying goodbye to everybody you know, putting yourself in the hands of fate and having to rely on your own instincts. Apple bundled a copy of the CD with every single Macintosh for a year. So 500,000 people got this story where you could touch on a picture and it would play. You go to the next slide. Sorry, go ahead.
Rick, I'd just like to add something here. The entire industry had only sold 20,000 CD-ROM players. And somehow between Rick and me, we said we'd ship 1 million. Nobody wanted to make them. And 1 million computers without compelling content, I'd be fried.
You know what's amazing is that people don't remember that Apple was the first company to put a CD-ROM drive into a computer and the first company to take it out of the computer. The MacBook Air, people were shocked, like, how am I going to use my computer without a CD-ROM drive? I bought one thinking this is going to be totally useless. I bought the external CD-ROM drive. I never used it once.
Yeah.
It was Steve Jobs, as usual, was like so far ahead of the curve with all this.
Right.
If you go to the next slide, and I'm almost through this now. I'm just going to, do you mind if I do this? So finally Hollywood made the movie 3 years ago. Mia Wasikowska, a wonderful, incredible Australian young actress who played Alice in Wonderland with Johnny Depp, played Robin. Adam Driver from Star Wars and Girls played me. They flew Robin and me back to the Outback. It was so surreal. They actually had taken my photographs and built the movie sets. They cast all the actors to try to look like her father, looked just like her father. So if we play the trailer, it's a wonderful trailer. This is made by the guys who did the King's Speech.
Dear Sir, I am planning to walk across the Australian desert from Alice Springs to the Indian Ocean, a distance of 2,000 miles. And when people ask me why I'm doing it, my usual answer is why not?
Your plan is ridiculous.
You must be mad, girlie. You know, that's about 2,000 miles. 6 months of hard walking. You want to die out there or something?
I'm so alone.
We all are.
It won a lot of awards around the world. It was really very surreal to watch something you've been part of on the silver screen. They did you always hear these horror stories about Hollywood, but these people were so respectful to Robin and her story, and the actors did a great job. I know that we're almost out of time, but I wanted to share two things with you. We did a new book, this book, Inside Tracks, which and now with Photoshop 20 years later, really the reproduction is so much better in this book than it was in Alice to Ocean. So this is the new book, the new version. And I'm a technology junkie, and I think Satjiv was the one that sort of planted this seed many years ago. But this book is smartphone enabled, so you can actually point your tablet or your phone at different pictures in the book, and it plays. So you point at my photograph, and it plays that scene in the movie, which is kind of cool. So I was going to show one example of that for a second.
Well, while he's setting it up, he looked just like that when I first met him.
So you're going to be Vanna White here. You can see. I think that reference went over everybody's head. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. So I'm just pointing the tablet at the photograph. See if this works. And it plays that scene in the movie. So they're like, 1-minute clips, things like that. And the last thing I was going to say is that this was a Kickstarter project. This was the most successful Kickstarter book ever done. It did really well on Kickstarter, and then it actually did really, really well in the marketplace, which is thrilling. And the last thing I would say is, every year I have the best job in the world because I went from being a photographer to inviting my heroes and my friends and a whole group of journalists. So every year we take about 150 photographers, writers, filmmakers, and we all get them to collaborate to focus on different topics. So we looked at the world of big data, the global water crisis, the first year of the internet. So we just finished a book that came out about 3 months ago called The Good Fight. It's one of it's.
Well, they gave that to me.
You just jumped through that. And this has 63 different pictures. This is the history of all the struggles that people have made in America over the last 100 years for freedom and justice. And it's inspiring, it's disturbing, it's thought-provoking. And tomorrow night, if you're here in San Francisco, which you obviously all are, tomorrow night at the Commonwealth Club at 6:30, we're going to have DeRay McKesson, who's the wonderful podcaster from Pod Save the People, Jonathan Greenblatt, who's the head of the Anti-Defamation League, Ray Suarez from PBS and NPR, and we're doing a session for 600 people. We're going to be talking about all the struggles, all the progress that's been made in America for women, for Jews, for Muslims, the African American community, the Latino community, the disabled community, the gay community, Native Americans, and what's at risk right now with what's happening in Washington. So I hope some of you will join us there tomorrow night. It's going to be a really interesting discussion. We're very lucky to have so many people flying in to share and interact with the audience. So, and Satjiv, thank you for planting the seed so many years ago.
Yes. Well, let's give these guys a round of applause. Incredible masterminds on this stage.